Usually when you look at massive structures, like a towering modern skyscraper, you immediately focus on the glass, right?
Right. The glass, the steel.
Yeah, the brilliant human engineering that just reaches into the clouds, it all feels so incredibly solid. I mean, so permanent.
But if you actually go and talk to the structural engineers, they aren't looking up at the penthouse. They're looking down.
Well, yeah, because if you build all that magnificent architecture on like a sinkhole or a shifting sand, no amount of brilliant human engineering is going to save it.
Exactly. When the ground beneath it finally decides to shift, the whole thing comes down.
And that tension between visible architecture and invisible bedrock is the exact dilemma at the heart of the material we are diving into today.
Which is really exciting to get into.
It is. We are doing a deep dive into a fascinating sermon titled The Faith That Shapes a Better Future.
And just for some context for you listening, this is the second part of a four-part series called Life and Liberty, a journey of faith and freedom.
Right. And the goal of this deep dive is to explore the source's premise, which is looking at 250 years of American history. But, seeing that history not as just random acts, but as a systematic plan setting a nation apart.
Yeah, a plan to accomplish great things and ultimately learning how to face the future with faith rather than fear.
Exactly. The text uses a quote early on to kind of frame this perfectly. It's from Ronald Reagan. He said, "If we ever forget that we're one nation under God, then we will be a nation gone under."
Which is quite a statement.
It really is. And, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, this quote perfectly encapsulates the central tension of the sermon.
Yeah, it sets it up perfectly.
Right. It's arguing for the absolute need to anchor a nation's future in something significantly deeper than just human engineering, or like military might or political maneuvering.
Because the text suggests that when we face the uncertainty of tomorrow, our default human reaction is almost always fear.
Oh, 100%.
We scramble, we try to engineer some complex solution, or we just, fall into despair.
Yeah, we panic. But the sermon anchors itself in a historical blueprint for responding to that cultural chaos with faith instead.
Specifically drawing from the biblical book of Lamentations, chapter 3, which we'll get into.
But first, if the natural human default is fear and scrambling, how does this blueprint actually look in practice?
Right, like historically speaking.
Exactly. To understand that, the sermon points to a moment of intense spiritual confusion in a very young America.
Yeah, we are looking at the American frontier in August of 1801.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So specifically the rural countryside of Kentucky, near a little log cabin called Cane Ridge.
Cane Ridge, right?
Yeah, and to understand the gravity of this, you have to realize this is just 50 or so years after the First Great Awakening.
Which was that massive wave of religious revival that swept the colonies.
Right, and it had to unify the country before the Revelation. But by 1801, that unifying energy had totally faded.
So things were getting messy.
Very. The young country is fraught with deep denominational rivalry, spiritual apathy, and a frontier culture that was becoming increasingly lawless.
So just a totally fragmented, chaotic culture.
Extremely fragmented. Yet in the middle of all that, something extraordinary happens.
Oh, I love this part.
Between 10,000 and 20,000 people travel, by wagon, on horseback, or just walking for miles, to gather in the oppressive heat and dust at Cane Ridge.
Wait, 10 to 20,000 people? In 1801.
Yeah.
Just the logistics of feeding and housing that many people on the raw frontier is staggering. There were no highways, right? No infrastructure. Why did they all go?
They gathered under the trees for a revival that lasted several days. People from all backgrounds came to hear the gospel preach, to sing, to pray.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this gathering was hosted by a small Presbyterian church and its minister, Barton W. Stone, and it sparked what became known as the Second Great Awakening.
Which completely changed things.
It did. It set off countless smaller revivals across the frontier over the next 40 years, completely altering the cultural landscape of the nation.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the underlying mechanism here, though. Why is Cane Ridge the starting point for this sermon's blueprint about facing the future?
Well, the sermon focuses heavily on the psychological and spiritual response of leaders like Barton W. Stone and others like Alexander and Thomas Campbell.
Okay.
They were looking at a broken world, a corrupt culture, and all this petty denominational tribalism where churches spent more time fighting each other than helping people.
Which sounds a bit familiar, honestly.
It does, doesn't it? But the author notes that they didn't respond to that cultural darkness with fear or despair. They didn't just complain about the moral decay.
Right.
Instead, they asked a really profound question. They asked, what if we went back to the original blueprint?
So they wanted to strip away the centuries of added tradition,
Yes, exactly. They wanted to restore the simple teachings and practices of the New Testament church, birthing what became the Restoration movement.
which had a very specific motto, right?
Yep. No creed but Christ, and no book but the Bible.
I was thinking about this idea of going back to the original blueprint, and it honestly reminds me of troubleshooting a glitching computer.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. When your screen freezes or starts flashing those terrifying critical error messages, the fear-based reaction is to panic. You start mashing every key on the keyboard, hoping some combination fixes it.
Which usually just makes it worse.
Exactly. It corrupts the system further. But what the Restoration Movement did was the equivalent of taking a deep breath and deciding to wipe the corrupted software entirely. They just decided to restore the system to its factory settings.
Going back to the source code. But think about the psychological difficulty of a factory reset for those people.
No, for sure.
The sermon highlights that they had to give up their deeply held denominational loyalties, their specific traditions, and their desire to engineer a complex religious system.
They really had to let go of control.
They did. They had to strip it all down and admit that their own human plans had completely failed. Returning to the Bible was that factory reset. They chose faith over the fear of losing their established control.
But, sometimes you look at the reality of a situation and the factory reset reveals that the hard drive is, like, physically shattered.
Yeah.
What do you do when returning to that blueprint forces you to confront absolute ruin? Because it's one thing to have a revival in a pretty Kentucky forest. It's another thing when your entire world has literally burned to the ground.
And that's where the sermon introduces the first habit of hope, which is remember.
Remember. Okay.
To understand the mechanism of this habit, the text pulls us deeply into the world of Lamentations.
So we're looking at the Old Testament now.
Right. This is an Old Testament book written by the prophet Jeremiah right after the devastating fall and destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. This is around 586 BC.
So not exactly an uplifting setting. The city was besieged, the people were starving, and the temple, which was the very center of their universe, was totally destroyed.
It's a brutal context.
Mm-hmm.
Jeremiah is literally sitting in the smoking ashes of his conquered nation.
Wow.
The text is basically a collection of poems giving grief a voice. In fact, the first 4 chapters are written as an acrostic of the Hebrew alphabet. It is quite literally the A to Z of grief.
E to Z of grief. That is intense.
And Jeremiah uses incredibly intense, sorrow-soaked words in Lamentations chapter 3, verse 19. He talks about his affliction and his wanderings, and then he uses 2 very specific words, wormwood and gall.
Wormwood and gall.
Yeah.
I know in the Hebrew context, wormwood points to a deep, profound bitterness, and gall intensifies that image into, like, a poison-like sorrow.
Exactly.
It sounds like he is describing what we would just call severe trauma or PTSD today.
He absolutely is. He is saying his soul is bowed down within him. He knows what it is to taste absolute toxic grief.
Wait, I'm kind of struggling with this. If the goal of the sermon is finding hope for the future, why is Jeremiah obsessing over wormwood and gall?
It seems counterintuitive, right?
Yeah. Doesn't fixating on bitter, toxic pain just trap you in the past? How does reliving that trauma build a better future for you?
Well, the text hinges on this exact paradox. Jeremiah isn't just dwelling on the pain to throw a pity party or to, remain a victim.
Yeah.
He is acknowledging reality. You can't heal a wound you refuse to look at.
That makes sense.
The author points out that the turning point happens in Lamentations 3.21. After acknowledging all that bitter ruin, Jeremiah says, "But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope."
But this I call to mind.
Yeah. The sermon argues that faith is not the denial of pain. It is the active, intentional discipline of redirecting your focus from the pain to the character of God.
I see.
The Hebrew word for hope used here isn't wishful thinking. It isn't just, crossing your fingers. It translates to settled expectation.
Settled expectation.
Right. It is a concrete confidence rooted firmly in who God is, completely regardless of the ashes around you.
So the habit of remembering isn't about replaying your trauma on a continuous loop.
Yeah.
It's about actively interrupting that loop by remembering God's track record.
Exactly. If you only feed your soul a steady diet of fear and bitterness, you just stay overwhelmed. You have to call a different truth to mind.
And the sermon illustrates this psychological shift with a staggering story, right, from World War II.
Yes, it's about an American soldier named Spencer January from Dallas, Texas.
Right.
His unit was trapped outside Augsburg, Germany. They were facing this deadly clearing, completely covered by enemy machine guns. Crossing it meant almost certain death.
So literally the ultimate picture of a bleak, terrifying future, the machinery of human war at its absolute most lethal.
Spencer drops to his knees, overwhelmed. He's thinking of his wife and his infant son back home, and he just prays for help.
Yeah.
The sermon notes that at that exact simultaneous moment back in Dallas, an elderly woman in his church feels prompted to pray specifically for him. She
Wow.
prays, Lord, whatever danger Spencer's in, just cover him with a cloud.
And then, as Spencer's unit is ordered to advance into that deadly clearing, a sudden, dense fog descends right over the field.
Just out of nowhere.
It completely hides them from the enemy machine gunners. Every single soldier makes it safely across, and the second they are clear, the fog lifts, and the enemy absolutely destroys that clearing with bombs and artillery.
It's an incredible story. And the sermon uses this battlefield story to illustrate a really profound rhetorical point.
Why a battlefield?
Because it represents the ultimate scenario where human plans and military engineering completely fail.
Yeah, there is no engineering your way out of that.
The deadly field was right in front of him. That was the visible ruin. But shifting focus to a steadfast hope, seeking divine intervention, completely altered his future.
He didn't deny the machine guns were there.
Right. The sermon frames it as him calling upon a higher authority when the plans of man had turned lethal.
So if Jeremiah's first step is forcing his mind to remember God's track record instead of his trauma, what is he actually anchoring to? You can't just anchor your mind to empty air and expect to feel secure.
Well, when we look at verses 22 through 24 of Lamentations chapter 3, the sermon breaks down exactly what Jeremiah is anchoring his soul to.
Which brings us to the second habit.
Yes, rely. He remembers three great realities. First, he points to God's steadfast love.
And there's a lot of depth in the original language for that phrase, isn't there?
A tremendous amount. The specific Hebrew word used here is ham. It describes a loyal, covenant love.
Okay.
This isn't a transactional love where you have to, earn it every single day.
Yeah.
It's a love that simply does not walk away, even when the situation is dire or when the people have totally failed.
It's based entirely on God's character.
Exactly. Jeremiah notes that this love never ceases.
What is the second reality he relies on?
God's endless mercies. The text says these mercies are new every morning.
New every morning.
The crucial insight the author draws here is that you cannot live today on yesterday's grace. The mercy is delivered fresh, daily, right when you need it for that specific day's troubles.
And the third reality is great faithfulness. God was faithful in the past, is faithful now, and will be in the future.
Right. And the sermon points out that for Jeremiah, sitting in the smoldering ruins of Jerusalem, this isn't just sentimental poetry meant for a greeting card.
No, not all.
It is war-tested theology. And that leads to Jeremiah's incredible declaration, the Lord is my portion.
My portion.
Yeah. Now, in the Old Testament, a portion was your inheritance, your land, your livelihood. It was everything that kept you alive and secure in society.
I love the analogy the sermon uses here. It points out how people today try to anchor their lives to other portions. We try to anchor to our careers, our retirement accounts, or, the outcome of the next political election.
Which is incredibly common.
But trying to anchor your peace of mind to the stock market or a political cycle is like standing on a dock and trying to drop a heavy iron anchor onto the deck of a moving speedboat.
Oh, man.
Right. It's guaranteed to shake, it's violently unstable, and will just rip the rope right out of your hands.
It really will.
Jeremiah is saying everything else may be stripped away, the speedboat might speed off, but if the Lord is my portion, I have an anchor that holds fast.
And we see that anchor holding fast in one of the darkest periods of American history, the Civil War, from 1862 to 1865.
Yeah, the source text brings up a really profound historical reality here.
It does. While the nation was literally tearing itself apart, brother against brother, immense bloodshed, revivals broke out in both the Union and Confederate camps.
That is just a total paradox to me. You would think extreme trauma and war would trigger mass despair or atheism, not mass faith.
You really would.
When the visible architecture of the country was collapsing, you'd think people would abandon hope.
But historians actually estimate that between 100,000 and 200,000 Union soldiers and at least 100,000 Confederate soldiers came to Christ during the war.
That is wild.
These revivals swept through the tense and the battle-weary regiments, often interrupted by actual marches and battles. Men gathered under makeshift shelters to sing, repent, and read scripture by lantern light.
Wow.
You had soldiers who had just lost their closest friends in battle, kneeling in the freezing mud, asking for mercy.
They were finding that God's mercies truly renew every morning amidst the cold, the fear, and that profound uncertainty.
And the sermon uses this to prove that this faith provides a stabilizing anchor, even when the human engineering of the nation, the Constitution, the government, the economy, has completely failed.
It proves that war-tested theology really holds up under the most severe pressure.
Exactly.
But wait, if someone is remembering God's character and relying on his mercy, are they just supposed to sit back in a recliner and watch history happen?
Good question.
Because it sounds like we're just supposed to wait for the fog to roll in or the revival to happen. Is the posture of faith entirely passive?
The sermon anticipates that exact question. If we look at the final verses of our text, Lamentations 3.25 through 27, Jeremiah uses three very active words: wait, seek, and good.
Okay, wait, seek, and good.
He says, "The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him." This is the third and final habit, which is reach.
Reach. Wait is a tough one. In our modern instant gratification, prime delivery culture, wait is a deeply frustrating word.
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds passive. It sounds like giving up control and just letting the chips fall where they may.
It definitely does to our modern ears.
Mm-hmm.
But the sermon emphasizes that biblical waiting is not an empty delay. It's not passive fatalism where you just throw your hands up and say, well, whatever happens, happens.
Right.
It is the posture of a heart that trusts God's timing more than its own impulsive reactions.
So it's not like waiting for a bus while you mindlessly scroll on your phone.
No, not at all.
It's more like a professional tennis player waiting to return a 120-mile-per-hour serve. You are waiting, yes, but you are coiled.
Yes.
You are active. You are highly alert, positioned, and ready to move the second the ball crosses the net.
That is active expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's reinforced by the next word Jeremiah uses, which is seek. Seeking is relational and it's intentional.
Right.
It means drawing near in prayer, in study, in surrender. The text argues that a faithful future belongs to people who actively seek the Lord, not just those who admire him from a safe distance or, treat religion like a spectator sport.
And what about that third word, good? Jeremiah says it twice. He says, it is good to wait quietly. And then he says, it is good for a man that he bear the yoke in his youth.
Yeah, the sermon interprets bearing the yoke in youth as a call for early discipline and discipleship. The author refers to it as Deuteronomy 6 living.
Deuteronomy 6 living.
Right, which is the biblical mandate to pass down faith, laws, and testimonies to your children continuously, whether you are sitting in your house or walking by the way.
The text frames it kind of like stress testing a bridge before you open it to heavy traffic. Deuteronomy 6 living is about intentionally building spiritual muscle memory in your kids now.
Yes.
So when the inevitable cultural storms hit them later, their default reaction is faith, not panic.
By forming habits of faith early, you prepare a whole generation to handle severe storms. It's about training the next generation to trust God's timing instead of just complaining about the cultural darkness.
Right.
And the sources provide one final, incredibly powerful historical anchor to illustrate this posture of actively seeking God on a national scale.
And this one takes us to June 6, 1944, D-Day.
Exactly.
The invasion of Normandy, a monumental turning point for global freedom, and arguably the absolute pinnacle of human military engineering at the time. Thousands of ships, planes, and troops coordinating an impossible amphibious assault.
And that evening, President Franklin D. Roosevelt took to the national radio waves. Normally, a president in that moment gives a rousing political speech to rally the troops in the home front, touting the massive strength of the military.
Sure, that's what you expect.
But FDR didn't do that. Instead, he broadcast a word-for-word prayer to millions of living rooms across America.
And the sermon uses this moment to illustrate a really profound point. FDR recognized that human military might, all that incredible engineering, just wasn't enough on its own.
No, it wasn't.
The source frames this as a leader bringing a nation to its knees to actively wait on God.
He prayed for the soldiers, asking God to give strength to their arms, stoutness to their hearts, steadfastness in their faith. He asked for the nation at home to rededicate themselves in renewed faith.
The author argues that generation passed down a legacy of freedom, not because they relied solely on their own brilliant plans, but because they anchored their struggles in a profound act of faith.
So when you pull all the way back and look at these 250 years, from the dirt at Cane Ridge to the beaches of Normandy, the bitter ashes of Jerusalem, the freezing mud of the Civil War, the sermon argues that there's a clear thread.
A very clear thread.
The author sees a systematic plan where facing the future with faith rather than fear consistently sets a nation on a better path.
Yeah.
And it's achieved by practicing these three habits: remembering God's character, relying on his daily mercy, and actively reaching for him in expectant waiting.
It's about choosing to stop reliving the pain, the wormwood, and the gall, and instead calling to mind the war-tested theology of God's faithfulness.
Exactly.
Which leaves us with one final lingering thought for you, the listener, to mull over today. We talked about Lamentations 3.23, the promise that God's mercies are new every morning.
Right.
As we discussed, this means you cannot and should not try to live today on yesterday's grace.
It's a daily delivery designed specifically for the day's unique challenges.
So here is the question for you to take with you. What yesterday's grace are you currently trying to run on?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Are you trying to face today's massive challenges using the stale energy of a past victory or a past comfort? Because if you wake up tomorrow expecting a fresh, newly delivered supply of mercy, custom built for tomorrow's specific problems, how would that completely change your approach to the uncertainties you are facing?
It shifts your entire perspective from looking back in fear to looking forward in faith.
Because at the end of the day, no matter how shiny the glass and steel of our human plans might look reaching into the sky, if the foundation isn't anchored to something deeper than ourselves, it's just a matter of time before the ground shifts. Build on the bedrock. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.